For 22 years, I unlocked that shop before sunrise and locked it long after everyone else had gone home. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, vacations, and even my own daughter's school events because my family always said, "One day, this business will be yours." I believed them. Every extra hour, every sacrifice, every sleepless night felt like an investment in the future they promised me. Then, in less than 5 minutes, everything changed. My parents sat me down, slid a stack of legal papers across the table, and calmly announced that they had transferred ownership of the shop to my younger sister. Their reason? She's better at business. I thought it was a joke. After all, she had never opened the store at 6 in the morning, never dealt with angry customers, never balanced the books after midnight, and never spent 22 years keeping the family business alive. She barely knew how the place even operated. But they were completely serious. They expected me to keep working there anyway, as an employee. No ownership. No appreciation. No future. Just a paycheck in the business I had spent my entire adult life building. I looked around the room, hoping someone would tell me it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, every member of my family nodded in agreement, as if I should be grateful they were offering me a job at all. That was the moment I realized something painful. They had never seen me as the future owner. They had only ever seen me as free labor. So I stood up, smiled, wished my sister good luck, and walked out without saying another word. They celebrated as if they'd won. None of them realized that I was the one person who knew every supplier, every customer, every contract, every secret that kept that business alive. And within a year, the same family who threw me away would be standing on my doorstep, begging for a second chance. They just didn't know it yet. 22 years of loyalty. People often say blood is thicker than water. I used to believe that. When I was 19 years old, my father handed me a ring of old brass keys and pointed toward a small neighborhood hardware store that had belonged to our family for decades. "This is your future," he said. "Take care of it, and one day it'll take care of you." Those words became the foundation of my entire life. While my friends were going to college, traveling, and figuring out who they wanted to become, I already knew my path. Every morning, I arrived before sunrise. I swept the floors, stocked the shelves, unloaded deliveries, handled customer complaints, and stayed late balancing receipts after everyone else had gone home. There were no weekends. No holidays. No vacations. If the shop needed me, I was there. At first, I didn't mind. I believed I was building something that would eventually belong to me. Every sacrifice felt like another brick in the future my parents had promised. Over the years, that tiny store became one of the most trusted businesses in town. Customers didn't just come to buy tools or supplies. They came because they trusted me. I knew their names. I remembered what projects they were working on. I asked about their families, their jobs, and even their pets. Some customers had been coming in for so many years that they felt more like relatives than the people I actually shared DNA with. Whenever someone complimented the business, my father proudly accepted the praise. But behind closed doors, he'd quietly tell me, "Keep working hard. One day, all of this will be yours." Those words were enough to keep me going. My younger sister, Emily, had a completely different life. She was charming, confident, and always seemed to be everyone's favorite. If she wanted to travel, my parents encouraged her. If she wanted to quit a job after 3 months, they supported her. If she made an expensive mistake, they laughed it off as part of learning. Meanwhile, I was expected to be responsible. Reliable. The dependable son who never complained. Whenever I questioned the obvious difference in how we were treated, my mother smiled and said, "You're older. We expect more from you." Eventually, I stopped asking. I convinced myself that fairness would come later. After all, I was the one earning the business. At least, that's what I thought. By the time I turned 41, I knew every inch of that store better than my own home. I could tell which supplier would deliver late before they even called. I knew which products would sell before the seasons changed. I knew exactly which customers needed credit and which ones only pretended they did. The shop wasn't just where I worked. It was part of who I was. Then, one Monday morning, something happened that should have warned me. My father arrived nearly an hour later than usual. Instead of heading to the office, he walked through the aisles with Emily beside him. She was wearing an expensive business suit, carrying a designer laptop bag, and acting as if she were inspecting a company she'd never seen before. She barely greeted the employees. Instead, she looked around and casually asked, "Don't you think this place feels outdated?" I laughed, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. For the next hour, she criticized everything. The shelves. The layout. The pricing. Even the way I greeted regular customers. My father didn't correct her once. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully, as though every word she said carried more weight than my 22 years of experience. That was the first time I felt something I couldn't explain. Not anger. Not jealousy. Just unease. Something was changing. I could feel it. I just couldn't see it yet. That afternoon, as I finished reviewing inventory reports, my mother called. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Can you come over for dinner on Friday?" she asked. "We've got some important family news." I smiled. Maybe this was it. Maybe after 22 years, they were finally ready to make everything official. I had no idea that Friday night wouldn't be the happiest evening of my life. It would be the night my family destroyed 22 years of loyalty, with a single sentence. The family announcement. By Friday evening, I had convinced myself I already knew what the important family news was. After 22 years, what else could it be? The business had never been stronger. Sales had grown every year for the past 5 years. We had expanded our inventory, built relationships with reliable suppliers, and earned a reputation that stretched far beyond our little town. It felt like the right time. The right moment. The promise my parents had repeated for decades was finally about to become reality. I even stopped by a bakery on my way to my parents' house and picked up my mother's favorite cheesecake. It wasn't a celebration yet, but I wanted the evening to feel special. When I arrived, every car was already in the driveway. Emily's luxury SUV sat right beside my father's old pickup truck. Inside, everyone was smiling. My mother hugged me warmly. "Dinner's almost ready." Emily barely looked up from her phone. My father was unusually quiet. The atmosphere felt rehearsed. Like everyone knew their lines except me. We sat around the dining table, making small talk while eating roast chicken and vegetables. My father asked about the store, but for the first time in years, he didn't ask for details. No questions about inventory. No questions about customers. No questions about next month's orders. Instead, he kept glancing toward Emily. She smiled every time their eyes met. That uneasy feeling from Monday returned. After dinner, my mother cleared the plates while my father stood up. "Let's move into the living room." His voice was calm. Too calm. Everyone took a seat. I noticed a thick manila folder resting on the coffee table. My father picked it up but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he folded his hands. "You've dedicated a big part of your life to the family business." I smiled. Finally. The store wouldn't be where it is today without your hard work. For a brief moment, I felt proud. Then came the word that changed everything. But. One word. That was all it took. But the business has reached a point where it needs new ideas. I frowned. I don't understand. Emily crossed her legs and leaned back comfortably. My father continued. "After a lot of discussion, your mother and I believe Emily is better suited to lead the company into the future." The room suddenly felt smaller. I looked from my father to my mother. Nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. Nobody said this was a joke. What do you mean? I finally asked. Emily spoke before anyone else could. I'll be taking over management. I stared at her. You've never worked there. I have a business degree. And? She shrugged. I understand growth. I almost laughed. Growth? She had never negotiated with suppliers. Never handled payroll. Never calmed an angry customer. Never opened the store at 6 in the morning during a snowstorm because the employees couldn't make it. She knew spreadsheets. I knew the business. Surely my parents could see that. Right? My father slowly opened the folder. Inside were legal documents. The ownership transfer has already been prepared. My heart skipped a beat. What ownership transfer? The shop. He slid the papers across the table. We're transferring ownership to Emily. I didn't touch them. I couldn't. The words didn't seem real. I looked at my mother. You agreed to this? She lowered her eyes. We think it's best for the family. Best for the family. I had heard those words my entire life. Every sacrifice. Every missed holiday. Every extra shift. Every time I put the business ahead of my own life. It had always been for the family. Now those same words were being used to justify taking everything away from me. My father cleared his throat. This isn't personal. I looked directly into his eyes. It feels very personal. Emily sighed dramatically. Don't make this emotional. I turned toward her. Emotional? My entire adult life is that store. She folded her arms. And you'll still have a job there. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard her. A job? She nodded. As general manager. General manager. In the business I had built. Working for someone who had never spent a single full day behind the counter. My father added quickly. It's a good salary. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't offering me what had been promised. They were offering me permission to continue working in my own life's work, under my younger sister. Then Emily smiled. Not a kind smile. A victorious one. I'll probably make a few changes on my first day. That was the moment something inside me went completely silent. Not anger. Not sadness. Just silence. I looked around the room. Every face was waiting for me to argue. To beg. To fight. Instead, I slowly stood up. I pushed the untouched papers back across the table. Then I smiled. A calm, polite smile. I hope it works out exactly the way you expect. Nobody spoke. I picked up my car keys. Walked to the front door. And left without another word. Behind me, I heard my mother call my name. I didn't turn around. As I drove away, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about lawsuits. I wasn't even thinking about the shop. I was thinking about one simple question. If they believed my sister could run the business without me, why were they so desperate to keep me as an employee? The answer to that question would change everything. The first morning without me. For 22 years, my alarm rang at exactly 4:45 every morning. I never needed a second alarm. My body had been trained by routine. Wake up. Coffee. Unlock the shop before sunrise. Check inventory. Start another day. But the next morning, the alarm rang. And for the first time in 22 years, I turned it off. The silence felt strange. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had just thrown away my entire life. A part of me wanted to get dressed, drive to the shop, and pretend none of it had happened. Maybe they would apologize. Maybe my father would admit he'd made a mistake. Maybe. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my assistant manager, Ben. Morning, boss. Are you running late? I stared at the message for a long time. Finally, I typed back. I'm not coming in anymore. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. A minute later, my phone rang. Tell me this is a joke, Ben said the moment I answered. I wish it was. What happened? I took a deep breath. My parents gave the business to Emily. Silence. Then. What? They want me to work under her. Ben laughed. Not because it was funny. Because he genuinely couldn't believe what he'd just heard. They've lost their minds. I think so. So, who's opening the store? I looked at the clock. It was already 10 minutes past opening time. I guess Emily. Ben sighed. You know she doesn't even know where the safe keys are. I know. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he asked quietly. What are you going to do now? I honestly don't know. After we hung up, I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat on the porch. For the first time in decades, I watched the sun rise instead of watching customers walk through the front door. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like losing a part of myself. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed again. This time it was one of our suppliers. Hey, just checking something, he said. Emily says she's taking over now. That's right. So, are you still our contact? No. Another pause. Well, that's concerning. What do you mean? You've handled our account for almost 20 years. We don't just switch everything overnight. I understand. If anything changes, give me a call. I don't think I'll be able to. He sounded genuinely disappointed. I guess some people don't realize what they've got until it's gone. Those words stayed with me all day. By lunchtime, more calls started coming. A contractor wanted to confirm a bulk order. A longtime customer wanted advice on a renovation. Another supplier had questions about upcoming deliveries. Every single one of them asked for me. Every single one. None of them knew I no longer worked there. Each time I explained the situation, the reaction was almost identical. Wait, they replaced you? I can't believe it. That doesn't make any sense. By evening, I had stopped answering unknown numbers altogether. I didn't know what hurt more. Losing the business. Or realizing how many people trusted me more than the name on the building. Just after dinner, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Ben was standing there. He looked exhausted. You won't believe today, he said. I stepped aside. Come in. He sat at my kitchen table and shook his head. Emily held a staff meeting. How did it go? She started by saying she was bringing the business into the 21st century. I couldn't help smiling. And? She rearranged the entire store. What? She moved products that had been in the same place for 15 years because she said the layout wasn't modern enough. I closed my eyes. Oh, no. Customers couldn't find anything. He continued. She also canceled 3 standing supplier agreements because she thinks she can negotiate cheaper deals online. My stomach tightened. Those suppliers had stayed loyal to us during difficult years. They weren't just vendors. They were partners. You warned them? I tried. What did she say? Ben gave a tired laugh. She told me I needed to stop thinking like the old management. I leaned back in my chair. That sentence told me everything. Emily didn't understand the business. She thought success came from changing things. She didn't realize the business was successful because of the relationships built over decades. Before Ben left, he hesitated. Can I ask you something? Sure. If another opportunity came along. He looked me straight in the eye. Would you build another business? I didn't answer immediately. The idea sounded impossible. I was 41 years old. Everything I'd built was gone. Starting over felt terrifying. But then I remembered something my father had once told me. The building isn't the business. Back then, he meant it as motivation. Now, it carried a completely different meaning. Maybe the building had never been the business. Maybe the business had always been the people. The customers. The employees. The trust. And trust wasn't something my family could sign away on a piece of paper. As Ben reached the door, he turned around one last time. I've worked with you for 16 years. I nodded. I didn't stay because of the family. He smiled. I stayed because of you. After he left, I looked across the street toward the empty lot that had been sitting vacant for years. For the first time since walking out of my parents' house, an idea crossed my mind. It was small. Dangerous. Almost impossible. But if it worked, my family wouldn't just lose their best employee. They'd gain their biggest competitor. The beginning of my revenge. I didn't sleep much that night. Ben's words kept replaying in my head. I stayed because of you. For years, I had believed people came to our shop because of the family name. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe they came because they trusted the person behind the counter. Maybe they came because they knew I would always find a solution, even when one didn't exist. The next morning, instead of driving aimlessly around town, I grabbed a notebook and started writing. At the top of the first page, I wrote 3 words. Start again. It looked ridiculous. I was 41 years old. I had no business. No building. No equipment. No employees. Everything I had spent 22 years building belonged to someone else. But there was one thing they couldn't take. Experience. I began making a list. Suppliers who trusted me. Contractors who called me first. Local businesses that had become close friends over the years. By lunchtime, my notebook contained over 200 names. For the first time since leaving the shop, I felt hopeful. Not because I had a plan. Because I realized I still had something valuable. Relationships. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my father. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello. His voice was unusually cheerful. I've been trying to reach you. I've been busy. Listen. Emily wants you to come in Monday morning. I don't work there anymore. You could. Silence. Then he continued. She's willing to make you general manager. I almost laughed. Willing? It comes with a raise. A raise? Yes. You gave away the business I've spent half my life building, and now you're offering me a salary? My father sighed. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I closed my eyes. I'm not the one making it hard. Think about the family. There it was again. The family. Every time they wanted something from me, they talked about family. But when it came time to keep their promise, family suddenly didn't matter. I've already made my decision. What is it? I'm not coming back. The line went quiet. Finally, he spoke. You'll regret this. No. I said calmly. I think someone else will. I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I had hung up on my father. Oddly enough, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Building from nothing. Monday morning didn't begin with a ribbon-cutting ceremony or a grand opening. It began with dust. The warehouse that Mr. Carter had offered us wasn't impressive. The concrete floor was cracked, the fluorescent lights flickered, and half the shelves were rusted. Most people would have walked in, taken one look around, and walked right back out. I smiled. Because I wasn't looking at what it was. I was looking at what it could become. Ben stepped inside carrying a toolbox and looked around. So, this is headquarters? For now. He laughed. I've seen worse. Within an hour, we were cleaning every corner of the building. We swept the floors, repaired broken shelves, and painted the front office ourselves. Every dollar mattered. We couldn't afford expensive contractors or fancy renovations. By lunchtime, both of us were covered in dust. Ben leaned against the wall and grinned. You know. What? This feels more like the old days than the old shop ever did. He was right. Back then, before the business became successful, my father and I had done everything ourselves. Somewhere along the way, we'd forgotten what hard work actually looked like. Now I was remembering. And strangely, it felt good. Over the next 2 weeks, our tiny operation slowly came to life. A retired electrician volunteered to fix the wiring. A local carpenter built us a checkout counter at cost. One of my former customers printed our first batch of business cards and refused to charge us. When I tried to pay him, he pushed the money back across the table. You helped my family when we were renovating our house. I was just doing my job. He smiled. Maybe. But people remember kindness. That sentence stayed with me. Because kindness was something my family's business had slowly forgotten. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. Hello? This is Karen from Westfield Construction. I immediately recognized the company. They were one of the biggest contractors in the county. We heard you left the family business. That's right. We've also heard you're starting your own company. News traveled fast. I am. She paused for a moment. If you're interested. We'd like to move our account to you. I nearly dropped the phone. Westfield Construction spent hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on materials. Losing them would be devastating for my family's store. Karen laughed softly. We're not leaving because of price. Then why? Because for 15 years. You always answered your phone. When deliveries were delayed. You fixed them. When we had emergencies. You opened the shop after hours. We're loyal to people. Not buildings. Not logos. People. After hanging up, I looked at Ben. We just landed our first major client. He stared at me for a second before breaking into a huge smile. You serious? I nodded. We're actually doing this. For the first time since everything had fallen apart. I truly believed we could succeed. Across town, things weren't going nearly as well. According to Ben's former coworkers, Emily had started blaming everyone except herself. Sales were falling. Customers were complaining. Experienced employees kept resigning. Instead of asking why, she held meeting after meeting about improving workplace culture. It didn't help. One evening, an old employee named Maria knocked on our warehouse door. She had worked at my family's shop for almost 12 years. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. She looked around at the unfinished building. It reminds me of the old shop. I smiled. It feels that way. She took a deep breath. I resigned this morning. I wasn't surprised. What happened? Emily accused me of resisting change because I questioned one of her decisions. Maria shook her head. I've never been spoken to like that. She hesitated before asking. Are you hiring? I looked at Ben. He smiled before I could answer. We just found room for one more. Maria laughed through happy tears. I was hoping you'd say that. 3 weeks later, our warehouse looked completely different. The shelves were stocked. The office was organized. The phones had finally been installed. It still wasn't glamorous. But it was ours. Late that afternoon, I unlocked the front door for our very first customer. An elderly man walked inside, looked around, and smiled. "I've been waiting for this place to open. What can I help you find?" He placed a small shopping list on the counter. I figured if anyone deserved my business, it was you. His purchase wasn't large. Barely enough to cover the electricity bill. But when he left, I realized something. This wasn't just our first sale. It was proof. People hadn't followed a family name. They had followed trust. As I locked the door that evening, Ben walked over carrying the day's receipts. "Want to know something funny?" "What?" He handed me the paper. "We made less money today than the old shop probably makes before lunch." I laughed. "So why do I feel happier?" Ben looked around the warehouse. "Because this." He tapped the counter we'd built with our own hands. "Actually belongs to us." I nodded. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I was building. And I had no idea that, less than a mile away, my father had just received the first financial report under Emily's leadership. The numbers were so bad. He read them twice, convinced there had to be a mistake. There wasn't. The consequences of his decision had finally begun. The cracks began to show. A month after opening our warehouse, we weren't making a fortune. But every week was better than the last. The phones rang more often. Contractors began placing repeat orders. Customers who had known me for years started recommending us to their friends. We didn't have a huge advertising budget. We didn't need one. Our reputation was doing the marketing for us. One Friday afternoon, Ben walked into my office with a grin on his face. "You should see this." He handed me a printed spreadsheet. "What am I looking at?" "Our customer list." I scanned the page. More than half the names were people I'd worked with for years. Some had only made small purchases. Others had moved their entire business to us. At the bottom of the page, one number caught my attention. 83%. "What's that?" Ben smiled. "Repeat customers." I leaned back in my chair. "You know what that means?" He nodded. "They trust us." That was something no marketing campaign could buy. Meanwhile, across town, the atmosphere at my family's shop had completely changed. The laughter that once filled the aisles had disappeared. Employees avoided eye contact. Customers walked in, looked around, and quietly left. Emily couldn't understand why. She blamed online shopping. She blamed the economy. She blamed the staff. She blamed everyone except herself. One Monday morning, she called an emergency meeting. "I've reviewed the numbers," she announced. "We have a loyalty problem." An employee cautiously raised his hand. "I think it's more of a service problem." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "Customers keep asking for people who don't work here anymore." Another employee added. "They miss the personal relationships." Emily rolled her eyes. "People don't shop because of relationships. They shop because of prices." The room fell silent. Everyone knew she was wrong. No one dared to say it. That afternoon, my father stopped by the shop to review the monthly accounts. He walked into Emily's office carrying a folder. "We need to talk." She looked up from her laptop. "About what?" He placed the financial report on her desk. "Revenue is down 28%. Emily barely reacted. "That's temporary. Profit is down 41%. We're investing in growth. We've lost 6 commercial accounts. They'll come back." My father sighed. "They've all moved to your brother." For the first time, Emily's confidence cracked. "They'll realize he's too small." My father looked at her for a long moment. "Or maybe they'll stay because they trust him." Emily didn't answer. She simply looked away. Back at our warehouse, we were facing a different problem. We were running out of space. Boxes were stacked against the walls. The loading area was constantly busy. Even the small office had become crowded. Ben laughed as he squeezed past another shipment. Remember when we thought this place was too big? I smiled. I do. Think we should start looking for a larger building? The question caught me off guard. Just 2 months earlier, I hadn't even known if we'd survive. Now we were discussing expansion. Life had changed faster than I could have imagined. Late that evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's name. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. Hello. Her voice was softer than usual. How have you been? Busy. I've heard. Another pause. I miss talking to you. So do I. There was silence. Then she quietly asked. Would you have dinner with us tomorrow? I already knew what this was about. It isn't just dinner, is it? She hesitated. Your father wants to discuss the business. I walked to the warehouse window and looked out at the employees finishing their shifts. Every one of them had chosen to believe in me. Every one of them had taken a risk. I'm not interested. Please. It would mean a lot to us. I closed my eyes. For years, I had been the one asking for time. Now they were the ones asking. I'll come. But only to listen. The next evening, I pulled into my parents' driveway for the first time since I'd walked away. Nothing had changed. The same porch. The same flower beds. The same family home. Yet somehow, it felt like I was visiting strangers. As I stepped out of my truck, I noticed something unusual. Emily's expensive SUV wasn't there. I rang the doorbell. My father opened the door. For the first time in my life. He looked older. Much older. His shoulders were slumped. The confidence that had always defined him was gone. Without saying a word, he stepped aside. Come in. The dining room was silent. No laughter. No celebration. No speeches. Just 3 empty coffee cups sitting on the table. My mother forced a weak smile. Thank you for coming. I took a seat. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, my father slid another folder across the table. This time, it wasn't full of legal papers. It was full of unpaid invoices, declining sales reports, and overdue supplier notices. He looked me straight in the eyes. And with more humility than I'd ever seen from him, he said, I think we made a terrible mistake. For years, I'd dreamed of hearing those words. Now that they had finally been spoken, I wasn't sure they meant anything anymore. The price of a broken promise. I didn't touch the folder. I didn't need to. The look on my father's face told me everything the paperwork couldn't. The man who had always seemed certain of every decision wasn't certain anymore. He sat across from me with his hands clasped together, avoiding my eyes. For the first time in my life, he looked defeated. I never thought it would end up like this, he said quietly. I leaned back in my chair. But it did. The room fell silent. My mother wiped away a tear. I know you're angry. I'm not. They both looked surprised. I was angry the night you gave the business away. I paused. Now I'm just disappointed. Those words hit harder than I expected. My father lowered his head. I thought Emily could modernize the company. And did you ever ask yourself why the company needed to be modernized? He frowned. It was already growing. It was already profitable. Our customers were loyal. So what exactly were you trying to fix? Neither of them answered. Because there wasn't an answer. The business had never been broken. Their judgment had been. A few moments later, the front door opened. Emily walked in. The confidence she used to carry had vanished. Her expensive clothes were still there. Her designer handbag was still on her shoulder. But she looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. She froze when she saw me sitting at the table. I didn't know he was here. My father sighed. Sit down. She reluctantly pulled out a chair. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, she looked directly at me. I made mistakes. I waited. I thought running a business was about strategy. She swallowed hard. I didn't realize it was about people. That was the first honest thing I'd ever heard her say. I've lost almost every major account. I know. The employees don't trust me. I know. The suppliers barely return my calls. I know. She stared at me. How? I smiled faintly. Because trust takes years to build. And only moments to lose. My father opened the folder again. The bank is asking questions. We're behind on payments. Several suppliers want cash up front. He looked at me. If this continues, we could lose the shop. The same shop I'd spent 22 years protecting. Hearing those words should have made me happy. Instead, it just made me sad. Not because of the building. Because of the memories inside it. My mother reached across the table. There's still time to fix this. I already knew what she was going to ask. We want you to come back. I smiled politely. As an employee again? She quickly shook her head. No. My father finally spoke. We want you to run the business. Emily slowly nodded. I'll step aside. For a brief moment. The room became completely silent. If they had asked me that 6 months earlier, I would have accepted without hesitation. It had been my dream. My purpose. Everything I'd worked toward. But dreams have a funny way of changing. I looked at each of them before answering. I can't. Emily frowned. Why not? I stood up and walked toward the dining room window. Outside, I could see the old maple tree I'd climbed as a child. For years, I'd believed success meant inheriting that shop. Now I understood something completely different. Success wasn't owning my father's business. It was building my own. I turned back toward them. I finally have something that's mine. I won't abandon the people who believed in me. My father looked devastated. You'd really let this business fail? I met his eyes. No. You let it fail. The room fell silent once again. No one argued. Because deep down, they knew I was right. As I walked toward the front door, my father called my name. I stopped. Without turning around, I waited. I'm sorry. Those 2 words echoed through the hallway. It was the apology I'd wanted for months. Maybe even years. Slowly, I turned to face him. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming anyone else. For the first time, he was accepting responsibility. I should have trusted the person who earned it. His voice cracked. I was wrong. I believed him. But believing someone is sorry doesn't erase what they've done. I nodded once. I appreciate the apology. Then I opened the front door. And walked away. Not because I hated them. But because some doors, once they're closed, can never be reopened the same way. 3 months later, our business had doubled in size. We hired 6 more employees. Moved into a larger building. And signed contracts with companies I once thought were out of our reach. One afternoon, Ben walked into my office carrying the latest sales report. He couldn't stop smiling. You're going to like this. I looked at the numbers. Then I laughed. For the first time, our company had officially become larger than my family's business. Not because we stole their customers. Not because we undercut their prices, but because we earned something they had lost. Trust. Ben folded his arms. So, do you think they ever imagined this would happen? I looked out across the warehouse floor, where employees laughed while loading another shipment. No. They thought they were replacing one person. I smiled. They never realized. I was the foundation holding everything together. And the greatest revenge wasn't watching them fail. It was proving that everything they said I couldn't do, I had already done. You can't. But you can learn from it. He nodded. I already have. Before leaving, he reached into his pocket and handed me the same old brass keys he had given me 22 years earlier. I don't need these anymore. I looked down at them. The metal was scratched from decades of use. For a moment, I considered taking them. Then I gently closed his hand around them. No. He looked confused. They belong to your past. I built my own future. A tear rolled down his cheek. He nodded without saying another word. That was the moment both of us finally let go. A month later, the old shop was sold to another local business. The sign with our family name was taken down. Watching it disappear felt like the closing of a chapter. Not the end of my story. Just the end of that one. Back at our company, life continued. Maria had been promoted to operations manager. Ben became my business partner. Our newest employees were learning the same values that had made customers trust us from the very beginning. Respect. Honesty. Hard work. Every Monday morning, I still arrived before sunrise. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. One afternoon, a young employee asked me, "Can I ask you something?" Of course. If your family hadn't betrayed you, do you think this company would exist? I looked around the warehouse. Employees were smiling. Customers were chatting with the staff. Forklifts moved carefully through the aisles. It wasn't perfect. But it was ours. I smiled. No. It wouldn't. He looked surprised. So, are you glad it happened? I thought about that for a moment. I'm not glad they betrayed me. I'm grateful I didn't let their betrayal define me. There's a difference. People often ask whether revenge is worth it. After everything I've been through, I've learned the answer. Real revenge isn't screaming. It isn't arguing. It isn't destroying someone else's life. Real revenge is quietly building a better one for yourself. The people who underestimated you expect to see you fail. They don't expect to watch you succeed without them. My family thought they had taken everything from me. In reality, they forced me to discover something I never would have found otherwise. My own path. And looking back now, losing the business I spent 22 years building turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. So if you've ever been underestimated, if someone has broken a promise you built your life around, remember this. No one can take away your character. No one can steal your experience. And no one can stop you from starting over. Sometimes, the greatest opportunities arrive disguised as the greatest betrayals. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my place?